New Zealand, by common agreement, has had an outstanding pandemic in the way it's been handled by experts, by the government, very low death rate, and in fact now is returning to almost normality. What has New Zealand done so differently that the UK hasn't done? And is it too late, frankly, for the UK to now try and do what New Zealand did?
Yeah, good morning. Well, what New Zealand did is it went into a very intense lockdown, and it's come out very cautiously to a virus-free country. And we used that time to build up testing and contact tracing, to really manage our borders very carefully. And so the goal is very different from my understanding of what is happening in much of Europe and North America, where countries are going in and out of lockdown, and basically it's a suppression model. But when you come out of it, you've still got circulating virus.
Professor Becker, there is an irony, isn't there? Because New Zealand has just confirmed 2 new cases of coronavirus. There was a 24-day streak of being COVID-free, and both of those cases are from the same family, and they had travelled from the UK.
That's right. And one of the things about the elimination approach is you will get setbacks. And obviously there's a major setback happening in Beijing at present. In New Zealand, I think this will not be the beginning of an outbreak. It's 2 cases that came through quarantine and were released very early for compassionate reasons. But that is the nature of the elimination approach. While we've still got a lot of virus in the world, that mistakes will happen. But the net goal is that you have no circulating virus going ahead. And I think that is attainable for most countries in the world at present.
I mean, one of the things New Zealand's had going for it, which we do here, but chose not to operate on, you basically shut down your island. But at some stage, New Zealand has to reopen its island. And there is a belief that it's probably easier for countries, smaller countries like New Zealand, where you can do that. But there is still going to be a risk when you try and let the island get open again.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is that many countries now in the Eastern Hemisphere are pursuing the same approach. I mean, you look at mainland China as protecting most of its 1.4 billion people. Taiwan is protecting 23 million people. Australia is protecting most of its population. So increasingly, there will be countries in this region that we can connect to, potentially without quarantine in the future.
But that means you can only ever see people from Australia or Taiwan. What about us, who want to come over and see our Kiwi mates?
Yes. Well, again, for the foreseeable future, that will mean normal quarantine, which, of course, is 2 weeks.
OK.
But there will be ways of shortening that in the future, I hope.
Yeah, OK. Well, let's bring in Professor Devi Sridhar. You've been very cautious about this, very scathing of the government strategy so far, and you believe right now that we're loosening things too fast.
Yeah, I think that we've probably taken the worst path because we're taking a long and extended economic and social pain, at the same time having a very high death toll. And so I think the way to do a lockdown is the way New Zealand has done it. You make it early, short, and hard. You try to get rid of the virus and you can open normally. Because as long as the virus is circulating, and it is circulating at still a high level, you have the risk of a second wave, which could possibly trigger a second lockdown, which would be even worse, as well as having to have businesses try to operate with 1 meter or 2 meter, which I think is in some way missing the plot. We should be focusing on how to get back to normality, kids back in school who can actually play together. And I think the model New Zealand presents, as well as a number of other countries around the world who are attempting this, is the optimal way forward, because the other paths are much worse.
Lord Haig in the Daily Telegraph calls lockdown a disaster for society, but he points at 2 other examples, at Germany and at South Korea. And from what I understand of the thrust of his argument, we could have pursued a policy of better, more comprehensive testing. And that could have provided an alternative to the sort of patchy lockdown that we have experienced.
Yes, I completely agree with him on that. And that's what we've been trying to argue for months, since February, when South Korea launched this model. And Germany quickly picked up that South Korea was doing something correctly and pivoted towards that approach. And that is the approach of mass testing, tracing, and quarantining those who are infected. And if we had taken this approach in mid-March, we probably would be on the other side now in June. I don't really understand what's changed in the past few months. And obviously people are tired of lockdown and we have to lift it.
I mean, one of the things, Professor Reid, that just strikes me as just increasingly farcical is that we have planes full of people flying from London to Scotland yesterday, jammed in like sardines. We have Nike store, with no one apparently obeying social distancing, and you're seeing that replicated all over the country. And yet we still don't have an ability, it seems, to open pubs, restaurants, bars and so on, which is going to be pivotal, I would have thought, for the economy coming back and also for people's well-being and everything else. A lot of publicans I know, restaurant owners I know, really exasperated by what they see as this sort of complete double standard going on.
Yeah, and I would add to that schools. My priority, if I was going to try to open up and have some kind of community transmission set off, would be schools. We need kids back in school. But the thing I would say about Scotland is we're still in lockdown here. The rules are still stay home. Our numbers are dropping, and the idea that Nicola Sturgeon has discussed is pushing the numbers so low that when we open up, we can resume normal activity in August. And so there's obviously going to be a tension between England and Scotland, because it's not very clear what England's objective is right now, where Scotland has made it very clear the objective is to get as close to elimination as possible, elimination being a moving target, not a fixed point of time.
How worried are you about a second wave? I mean, it's almost, depending on which scientists you talk to, there's going to be one, there isn't going to be one, there hasn't been one, there might be one. We now look at Beijing and it's all looking like it's flaring up again. What is the general consensus of the top experts about the likelihood of a second wave?
I think most scientists would agree that there will be a second wave. Where there's debate is how large it might be and when it could be triggered, whether it's in the next few weeks or whether it's in winter. But the issue is that the virus is still circulating. And so looking at the States, that's a classic example. They've reopened now quite fast, and you've seen a large explosion number of cases. And again, all these debates of, do you have a second lockdown or do you have to let it run through? And it's a very dangerous virus to just let pass through a population.
Professor Frank Furedi, I think my concern, just like Debbie's concern, is about schools. I think it's devastating for children. I think it's appalling that the government hasn't introduced better help for schools to try and get back on track this term. And they don't seem to have very much guidance for next term. We don't know if it's going to stick at 2 metres, 1 metre. But if you look at, for instance, elite sport, testing twice a week for Premier League players enables competition to get back up and running, admittedly behind closed doors. But why can't we, as Lord Hague suggests, why can't we have a comprehensive testing plan which would cost a fraction of the lockdown for the economy? And you test teachers and you test pupils, and then, if somebody is showing symptoms or they're infected, then they lock down and isolate. Isn't that one way? Why don't businesses introduce testing so that they can protect their employees? Is that a way forward rather than everybody being confused about whether we're being locked down or not?
Well, I think that's the optimal solution. The real problem is that schools have become very politicized. And I have the impression when you talk to teachers, when you talk to policymakers, is that what they really are worried about is what are the obstacles? Will parents rebel and refuse to send their kids to schools? Will the teachers' union sort of sabotage the plans to introduce a normal universal schooling? So we are now in a bit of a mess, because rather than having an ethos of doing whatever we can to look to the future and learn to live with the virus, because we're going to have to learn with that no matter what, we tend to do things very hesitatingly. And testing is very, very important. And Lord Hague is absolutely right that if we could develop a universal scheme of regular testing, then that could create a condition where society could learn to adapt to what will be a very long-term problem. And I think the key thing to understand is it doesn't really matter what has happened in the last few months. We have to look to the future and how are we going to learn to live with what is a new normality of living with a virus. How are we going to learn as communities and adapt to it? And the problem with the lockdown is that we don't learn anything as long as we're at home, as long as we don't talk to each other, as long as there is no capacity for communities to develop any kind of resilience. We're simply staying still And the sooner we begin to move out of it, obviously in a safe kind of a way, the more communities will learn how to live with this new experience.
Professor Frady, you're an expert in sociology and sort of the way people behave, I guess, in many ways. One of the biggest problems, it seems to me, goes back to the Dominic Cummings fiasco, where, supported by the Prime Minister and all the cabinet, there's the chief advisor who helped construct these rules, apparently brazenly breaking them when it suited him and his family. The number of young people who've cited Dominic Cummings' name to me as a reason why they no longer want to obey the rules and so on. It really, leadership is crucial, isn't it? When I look at places like Germany and New Zealand, strong leadership, telling the public, this is what we're doing, we're being firm, we're being draconian, this is why, seems to be much better than the kind of polite advisory strategy of the UK government and their own people breaking the rules.
I think the key element here is leadership. I think that for a very, very long time now, we've used the mantra of the science tells us this is what the science is, rather than using political judgment and telling the public that, look, we're going to go forward. There are a lot of risks. Either way, there are risks if we stay in a lockdown, there are risks if we move out. But at the end of the day, the goal, the objective that we have, and we're going to lead you in that direction, is to teach ourselves how to live with this problem. And we're going to implement testing, we're going to implement all the measures that are necessary to open up society. And I think it's, at the moment, there seems to be a certain restraint, a reluctance to take a chance and provide the kind of leadership that is all too rare at the moment.